Hello and welcome to today's episode where we are going to talk about the verbal plane, which is, as you know, which is part of the three planes of work as expounded by Dr. S. R. Ranganathan. I am Mustafa Zaidi, a teacher of library science for over 3 decades in the Aligarh Muslim University. I have also worked in certain libraries. Now, as you all know, Dr. Ranganathan had divided the work of designing a scheme of classification into 3 levels. These 3 levels he used to call the planes of work, and these 3 planes of work he called them the idea plane, the verbal plane and the notational plane. Dr. Ranganathan's ideas were revolutionary at the time that they were expounded, because before Dr. Ranganathan, people used to think of the symbols that would be used in a classification scheme. Dr. Ranganathan was the first person to say that before we think about the symbols, we should think about what is the basic organization or division of knowledge that we are trying to achieve in our libraries. So, he said that first of all, we should think about how the universe of subjects is divided, what are the subdivisions and how they should be arranged in a sequence. After that sequencing has been completed, we would now go then to the verbal plane. So, Dr. Ranganathan's ideas were first talked about the idea plane, which gave us the whole scheme of classification, especially whole scheme of knowledge classification. And after this scheme was made, the sequencing was done, we had to think of what to call them. This area he called the verbal plane. Now, this in today's world is even more important than it was at the time that Dr. Ranganathan expounded these ideas. Why? Because today, as we are all aware, we are in a world of computers, and computers primarily use search terms, and search terms are part of what we call the verbal plane. Because verbal plane can also be called terminology, meaning what names are we giving to names given to groups of ideas or ideas. Or ideas by themselves. So, in Dr. Ranganathan's world and in his theory that he talked about many times, he was trying to tell us to think about, for example, a group of concepts that we call physics today, which deals with study of the physical world. This 100 years back was known as natural philosophy. So, books which are published in the 19th centuries and books which are published in the 18th and 19th centuries and the beginning of the 20th century use this term, and then slowly this term was replaced by physics. The subject that we call physics today was 100 years back primarily in the English language known as natural philosophy. So, if you are looking for old books, a historical background of physics, and want to have a look at books which were published during that period, then you would not find much under this. You would find quite a lot of it here. So, that is why it is important that we have proper rules for terminology, and terminology is important today, as I told you, because today when we are in the computer age, we have a number of methods of searching for ideas through the stores that we have. We have one of the most famous engines that we have is Google. Now, how do you search for a subject or for a concept in Google? You write down the name, you think of a name, you think of a term, and we use terms, and we also use another word for it. We say we are using tags. Tags mean either a term, and they can also mean You may tag a person, an individual's name, it can be an individual name or an individual's name, and it can also be a name of concept. For example, if you are looking through photographs, you may use a tag which says that I want a tag of historical buildings. Now, how is the computer going to search for historical buildings? It is going to look through its database and find those pictures where the term buildings has been used or where the term historical buildings has been used. So, you will get a huge number of references which are dealing with historical buildings, but that is an ocean. So, you would want to refine it a little bit, and therefore, you would have to provide more context to what we call historical buildings. So, we can give more context by either using the name of an area, say historical buildings of India. If we want to be more specific, let us say historical buildings in Delhi. If we want to be even more specific, we can say historical buildings in Delhi during of the Mughal period. So, what are we doing? We are adding terms to the original term, and we today we are going to we are used to calling them tags. If you talk to a youngster today, then in fact, most of you would be youngsters, you would be more familiar with the term tags rather than the term terms. Now, that is why Dr. Ranganathan said that we have to be careful about what terms we are using, what tags we are using, what names we are using to identify various subjects or ideas or groups of ideas. So, one thing that this example gave us was that names of subjects or concepts change. Concepts change over time. And scholars of language would also know that names of subjects or concepts change over time. This is also supplemented by the fact that they also change over space. For example, the language that we speak here in North India, if you move either to the east or to the west, you would find that gradually the kind of language that we are speaking is still the same, but the words are changing. Certain words that we use, those certain words no longer have the connotation that we have when we are using it in Delhi. The same words would have a different connotation if you are using them in Lucknow or if you are using them in further east in Calcutta. So, what is important is that we should understand that names of subjects are not permanent. They are not permanent. And if they are not permanent, then we have to be careful as to what term we are using. That is one. The other thing is that if I use the term, let us say mathematics, then the group of concepts which were collectively known as mathematics about 200 years back have now expanded to include many more things which were not there earlier. I can take another example from the field of physics. About 200 years back, you did not have the concept of nuclear physics. So, when people are talking about natural philosophy, this concept of nuclear physics did not exist, because this is something which was discovered much later and which was incorporated into what we call physics. Similarly, the Raman effect was something that was discovered into the in the 20th century. It did not exist in the 19th century. So, if you are looking for these things, then there is a problem that the names of the terms change, the manner in which the terms are being used, they change. So, with change, you have when you are catering to people who are in the modern age, you have to use terms which are current, which are there, and that is why it is important that we have certain kind of guidelines on how these terms are to be used and how these terms are to be identified. Then another problem that we have in the field of words or in the field of languages is that the meanings of words are not precise. Meanings of words are not precise. What does that mean? What it means is that if I say, use the term poverty, how would you define poverty? Lack of resources. Or would you define it as lack of economic opportunities? Or would you quantify it and say that people who do have less than this per capita income are poor? If you do that and you apply it in India, then the level of poverty that you get in India and compare that with, let us say, USA, then those people who are known as poor in USA or who are quantified as poor in the United States of America would not be quantified as poor in India, because the economic parameters there are different from the economic parameters here. So, the term poverty itself does not convey much, except that in that particular area where you are using this term poverty, people are deprived of certain kind of resources. But if you try to quantify it or if you try to be more precise, then you would find that those who are considered poor here may not be considered poor here. So, this is a big dichotomy. That is what is meant by when we use the term, when we say that meanings of words are not precise. Meanings of words change according to the place where they are being used. Then another problem that we come across is that, which is part of what we say when we say meanings are not precise, is the problem of what we call synonyms. Now, we have studied what are synonyms. We all know what are synonyms. For example, the term which easily comes to our mind is lift, elevator, or road versus street. Now, when we are looking after a library or we are looking after a store of information, the question is that if I write the term lift in the Google search box, then what am I going to get? I am going to get the term lift wherever it has occurred, but a little bit of literature on lift would also be classified or would also be placed under the term elevator. This would not be retrieved. Now, this would not be retrieved, and quite a number of things where the term lift has been used would be retrieved, whereas what I am looking for is lift in the sense of elevator, whereas what would be retrieved by typing this term in a Google search box would be even lifting, which is a verb. This is a verb. The act of picking up something is known as lifting, but even this would be retrieved, which has got nothing to do with what I was looking for. So, this means that the terms that we are using may not actually comprehend all that I want. All that I want from the store may not be there, and some of it may be missed. So, that means what we get will be only a partial part of the collection, and we will also get a number of unnecessary things. These unnecessary things which have got nothing to do with what I was searching for, they would be retrieved. If I use the term elevator, then it will also retrieve elevation, because up to here it is the same, and the computer does not understand the difference between this and this, because it matches elevation ELEVAT with ELEVAT here, and it will retrieve all those documents where these two terms have, where this term has been used, but it will not retrieve anything where this term has been used. So, that is why it is very important that we understand that pure terminology or only terminology is not going to help us achieve much if we want to retrieve something from an information store. Similarly, here many places we use the term road, many other places we use the term street, and there is one more term which is used quite often in America. We have avenue, we have now in India we have expressways. What are they? They are all of them synonyms, different words which mean the same thing. Of course, if we get into arguments about the meanings, we would say expressways are roads where you have to move very fast, which are normally elevated, where sometimes you also have to pay tolls, but this would be a very lengthy definition of expressways. Expressways also mean roads, avenues also mean roads, streets also mean roads, and roads of course mean streets. So, if you are looking for something, if you are looking for, let us say, construction of roads, so you are not going to retrieve material which deals with construction of streets, not going to retrieve material which deals with construction of avenues or construction of expressways. So, quite a lot of things would be missed. So, that means that we have to decide which term is to be used, and then we have to decide that all of these terms should also be related to the term under which the material has been classified or under which the material has been kept. If the preferred term is road, then there should be a reference from a street. For example, it should be street C road. Avenue C road. That way we will have to build references, so that whenever we use one particular term, all other terms which are synonyms would also direct us to that particular term. If I am looking under road, then if I am using a computer, then my software should take care of the fact that people who use the term road should be directed to the term street, because additional material is found there. They should also be directed to avenue, and they should also be directed to expressways and all other terms which may be used for it. Now, here I use the term construction of roads. Now, we can also use the term building of roads. Now, as soon as the term building comes, as a verb it is the same as construction, but building is also a noun, and then a whole lot of new kinds of terms emerge. What are they? You have different kinds of buildings. For example, we have educational buildings, we have residential buildings, and we have institutional buildings, but material on this would also be retrieved, whereas you only want material which deals with how roads are to be built. So, I hope you understand the complexities involved in retrieving by using terms, and the number of terms that we have, and the extraordinary developments in languages which create new terms, new synonyms for a particular activity or for a particular noun. Then another problem that we have, which also has to be taken into account, is what we call homonyms. Homonyms are what? Words that are used for more than one concept. Synonyms are more than one word which mean the same thing. For example, we have the term, I have given you enough examples of synonyms, but homonyms are words which mean more than one thing, and this happens quite often. Can you think of any homonyms? Would any one of you try to think about it? You would find that there are many words that we use in our languages which are homonyms. What are these homonyms? Let us look at some of them. We have certain words which are spelled differently, but which are pronounced in the same way. For example, bear and beer. If you pronounce them, then they are pronounced in the same way. They are acoustic homonyms, but there are other homonyms where one word can mean many different things. For example, if you use the term library science, then library science today also includes within its domain information science. If you look at books which were published 50 years back, then you would find this word, and before that it used to be library economy. Library economy changed to library science, changed to information science, and then it became library and information sciences. But till the time that information science was separately accepted, the term library science meant also information science. So, that is why it is important for us, I keep on repeating that point, that is why it is important for us that we should have rules which help us in understanding how terms are to be used and how terms meaning should be defined, so that when I use a particular term while I am putting something in my information store, or when I am cataloging something and putting it in the library, then when you come there, if I am there, then I know in what context I use that term, but when I am no longer there, because in an institution people come and go, when I am no longer there and I have used a particular term in a particular sense, then you should also be able to understand the meaning of that term in the sense that I use them. That is why it is important, and this is what Ranganathan stressed, that we should have standards, or we should have a standardization in the manner of using terminology. So, we should have standardization. Standardization is also important because of one other factor, and that other factor is that we have multiplicity of languages. What does multiplicity of languages mean? Multiplicity of languages mean that we have many different languages. For example, we use the term history. History is a term in the English language, but if you use this, if you denote the same concept in Urdu, you will use the term tarikh. The same group of ideas is known as itihas in Hindi. So, if you write history and you have books in Hindi, it is not going to retrieve books in Hindi, because in Hindi the term history is not used. If you have books in Urdu, then there also you would not retrieve books on history, because their history is not known as history, their history is known by another word. So, multiplicity of languages, then change in the meanings of terms over a period of time and over space and distances, this plus the presence of synonyms, plus the presence of homonyms, plus the imprecise nature of of terms as we use in everyday life. That is why it is important that we have some kind of standardization which would help us in understanding how a person coming to the library looking for a particular concept or books or material on a particular concept is able to get what kind of material he wants from the library. Modern systems where classification in the sense that it existed during Dr. Ranganathan's time has practically disappeared from visibility to the as far as the user of the library is concerned. We now have moved towards areas where we call that we are building what we call thesaurus. We use thesaurus for retrieval, of information. Now, we all have heard of Rogers thesaurus, but Rogers thesaurus is a general tool which gives you alternatives of various terms that are used in various places. But when we are using the word thesaurus in library science, then we are not talking about Rogers thesaurus. What we are talking about, the concept of how different terms can be organized in a linear sequence, and that linear sequence may help us in retrieving what we want to retrieve. So, if you look into how various thesauruses work, then you would see that they bring in some kind of organization through what we call C references, C also references. They also use the term use, they also use for, they also use the term broad term, narrow term, and related term. This is to try and overcome the problems that we have in the use of languages. For example, as I told you that C, I have given you examples of C, that if you are using road, then if road is the preferred term, then you would have a reference from road to expressways, C road, and let us say we are using the term mammals. If we want to relate other material, we can say C also animals. So, that way we try to build up an organization of the terms that we have, so that we have their relationships are displayed by the use of these things, use for broader term, narrower term, and related term. I am sorry, there is a miss, and related term, and so on. We will talk about these terms in a subsequent program. I hope today you have understood why Dr. Ranganathan gave us the idea that we should have separate rules for the verbal plane, and in a later episode we are also going to look at what solutions he proposed, so that these problems are solved. Thank you very much.